Thank you for being here. I'd like to start by recognizing that we are on the shared unceded territories of the Squamish Nation, the Coast Salish peoples from the south, and Lil'wat Nation, the interior Salish peoples to the north. It's an honor to be hosting a conversation about mountain town resiliency on these shared territories. My name is Mandy Russo. I am the operations director for the Whistler Institute. And what is the Whistler Institute, you may wonder? We are a registered charity dedicated to influencing change and inspiring minds through education and thought leadership. Before I go any further, if you can all make sure that your phones are on silent, that would be great. I have mine here and I've made sure. If you're not familiar with the venue, the restrooms are at the bottom of the stairs to the right. If you use the elevator, it's down, straight in front of you down the hallway. So, the Whistler Institute, one of the ways that we do influence change and inspire minds is through events such as these, the Global Perspective Speaker Series, and tonight is our first of the season lineup. So tonight, our event is Peaks and Pressures, From Resort to Resilient Mountain Towns, and this is a conversation amongst a mountain resort planner, an academic, designer, and journalist, and an adventure tourism retail renter entrepreneur. This trio will explore how mountain towns can respond to increasing pressures from climate change, increasing economic disparity, and geopolitical relations. Tonight's conversation will explore case studies from around the world, highlighting strategies in design, infrastructure, and policy for resilience. They will also reflect on how Whistler compares our strengths, tensions, and opportunities in light of these global examples. This conversation offers timely insight into how a community like Whistler can adapt, thrive, and lead in a changing mountain world. I'm pleased to now introduce and welcome tonight's panelists. We have Erick Villagomez. And they're going to wave because we're going to run a video. So once the video's done, then they'll come up to the stage. So Erick is an educator, independent researcher, and designer with academic and professional interests in human settlements at all scales. He is a part-time lecturer at the School of Community and Regional Planning at the University of British Columbia and an adjunct professor at Kwantlen Polytech University's Chip and Shannon Wilson School of Design within the Interior program. Erick is the founding principal of Métis Design Build, a practice that works on diverse projects ranging from small-scale architecture to urban design consulting, and he's the editor-in-chief of Spacing Vancouver, an online publication looking at Metro Vancouver's public realm and urban landscape. If any of you follow our social media, I tried to share information about Erick from spacing.ca, and it was actually blocked because it's a journalist platform. Yeah, just so you know. So if anybody noticed that I tried to do a feature of all three panelists, I couldn't feature you. Our next panelist is Erick Callender. He is the vice president at Ecosign Mountain Resort Planners, one of the most innovative and experienced mountain resort planning companies in the world. Since 1997, Erick has personally contributed to the mountain master planning and base area planning of projects around the world. He has completed detailed site inspections for projects in Canada, the United States, Russia, Lebanon, Spain, Switzerland, Australia, New Zealand, Ukraine, and Kazakhstan. Erick is an expert in computer-assisted design technologies. He's proficient in custom residential and commercial architectural design, building permit and development permit applications, and construction management. Erick is also a wonderful letter to the editor writer and contributor at our RMOW council meetings. Bryce Phillips, our last panelist, is the founder and CEO of EVO, the global outdoor experiences company he launched in 2001 out of his Seattle garage. Today, EVO operates around the world, uniting retail, gear rentals, travel experiences, and lodging under the brands EVO and Rhythm Japan. I have to remember to breathe. With flagship stores, Evo Hotels, an e-commerce platform, travel business, skate parks, and beyond, Evo is known for blending commerce, cause, culture, and community in ways that create lasting connections with customers and the outdoor spaces they love. Bryce moved here in 1997 to Whistler. He started, arguably, Evo here by buying and selling skis and boards, and he did live here until 2004. So to share a little bit more about that, we have a video.
The last 20 years at Evo has been an incredible ride.
The one thing about Evo that's constant is nothing is constant. So you never know what's going to come around the corner.
Evo is a community. Evo is about experience. Evo is about giving back.
Evo is changing the way we do business in the outdoor industry.
Evo is your ticket to fun.
In 2001, EvoGear.com was launched out of my garage. And it's actually not many blocks away from our existing flagship store in Seattle.
Yeah, that garage has a lot of history in that garage.
My name is Bryce Phillips, and we're here at Evo in Seattle in the Fremont neighborhood.
The idea of bringing in events and bringing people into a space and bringing art and an art gallery into a space, that was all new, that was innovative.
No one else is doing anything like this. And whatever happening here is really special.
2006, launching BPTO, like for me, that opportunity to volunteer in community is one of the things that really sets Evo apart.
One thing that has been central to Evo that makes the experience different is our focus on community.
It is a company that is continually refining and tuning the way that it interacts with the community and how it serves the community.
In 2007, we really started to think beyond retail, and that was really that was the first trip that we ever took, and it was this amazing combination of ski, snowboard in Japan, and then surf and explore kind of Bali.
Evo trip maps back to our values because it's about people and relationships, and Evo is about relationships ultimately.
The thing about Japan is the powder. I thought it was a brilliant way to really allow people to actually go and have a full experience.
The chapter that started in 2008 was a defining time for Evo.
And as a group, we overcame a very difficult and challenging time in our history, and we did it together. When Evo Gear became Evo, it was more about the experience and less about the gear.
We thought we had conquered the freaking world.
It was growth from a gear-centric organization to a lifestyle organization. When we moved from Leary to Stoneway, it was another stair-step moment.
That store was so beautiful when it opened, and it was such an incredible transformation.
That was an amazing move and expanded all of our capabilities. We were able to do so much more in that space. When we launched in a mountain bike, it was a very natural progression because so many of the people at Evo were into mountain biking. And then the Portland store opens.
It was another moment in time where I just sat back and said, these guys are not messing around.
It just gave me an entirely new perspective on what a retail location could look like. It was so beautiful.
When we acquired Bicycle Doctor in Denver,
It was just like so clearly meant to be. The timing of it, the way it happened, and then ultimately what we created together kind of all speak for itself. Right around 20 years after living in Whistler and buying used skis and snowboards, I ended up reconnecting with Dave Milley, who sold me used skis and snowboards 20 years prior. To sit down for breakfast and to very quickly start talking about the opportunity to buy the business, it was just crazy. I was total full circle.
cross-border, 5 stores, 25 years of history. The moment for that group to be pulled into the fold of Evo, it was awesome. It was just like synergy, right? Just like flowing. That was a neat moment.
Campus Salt Lake is Evo really taking that next step towards its commitment to community.
From bouldering to the skate park, to our first ever hotel, to retail, like all of those work together to create this truly immersive experience.
The last 20 years at Evo has been an incredible ride.
The last 20 years at Evo have set the stage for the next 20 years.
From Campus Salt Lake to launching our first Evo hotel within Campus Salt Lake, expanding on the Sea to Sky and lighting up the Journeyman Lodge in Callahan Country.
We have a California footprint, Japan footprint, expanding ATS.
There are so many moves to come.
Evo wants everyone here to feel like they are part of something special and that everyone is invited.
The thing that we just did that you think is the best thing we'll ever do, we will just do something better.
And really, we're just getting started.
I would now like to welcome the panelists to their hot seats. And so this is Erick Villagomez. We've got Erick Callender in the middle, and then we have Bryce Phillips to the far side. To start off, well, first of all, I'll tell everyone the format of this evening. So we've curated some questions for the full panel. Some of the questions are pointed directly to individual panelists. Some of them will tap out of a question, some of them will tap in. And to start us off, I thought it would be great if each of you could define what is a resilient mountain town. And I'll start with Erick.
Great question, thank you all. I think part of the resilient, particularly mountain towns, because mountains bring kind of an extreme landscape to it, and a lot of the most resilient, I was warned against this, okay, I'm doing this all right, okay. I would say are a mixture of a number of different things, one of which is that they're very well adapted to the landscape that they're in. Number two, that there is almost like a bottom-up sensibility to it, and I say bottom-up to mean a more kind of traditional or vernacular type of knowledge that percolates through, and where that knowledge is manifested in ultimately the form and the policies, et cetera, that run out of those.
Yeah, I would say being adaptable. The weather is often really extreme in mountain towns, and so to thrive, you kind of have to be comfortable with quick changes. Extreme topography, but really often there's very few mountain resort communities that have urban sprawl and just kind of grow out of their footprint. And so people tend to live closer together, can be pedestrian orientated, but you know your neighbors. And so I think that really helps define a resilient mountain town.
Yeah, I kind of love this question. I mean, for me, as I was thinking about it, it really came down to people and culture. It's like, how do we as a community respond to all of the curveballs and things that are going to have or put pressures on a place? I mean, if we look back over the last, call it 5 years, like who could have imagined, you know, all of the different things that have transpired. And as I think about, you know, how to thrive or move through a time, it's about how do we respond as a community. So yeah, resilience really is a reflection of people, and if and when that is healthy at the core, you know, all of the different kind of outcomes or responses to these things are going to put pressure on us. Will move in a positive direction.
Great foundation setting, thank you. We collectively are worried about climate change, such as snow level rising, permafrost thawing, wildfires. Erick Villagomez, what do you say to that?
Yeah, there's climate change has a number of different variables, and it's entangled with a whole bunch
I'm going to interrupt you.
Oh, sorry.
Put it closer, thank you.
Again, I was warned against this, and I have just broken the rule yet again. Climate change is entangled with so many different variables, economic, social, et cetera, and it impacts everything. Now, the most present things that we see are things like fire, permafrost, et cetera. We see that locally in places like Kelowna, and really around the world. This year, it was much in and around Ontario, Quebec, northern Quebec. So there are a lot of these variables that are very, very physical, but also have different manifestations in terms of some of the other things, such as, again, economies, instability, and all of those have to be balanced together and kind of considered together that speak again towards a more adaptable form of thinking for pretty much all of the settlements, and all cities are included in this, of course. And I would say those are kind of the main variables, and I'm sure this is a theme that's going to be coming up over and over. And particularly when I'm going to already throw this bomb out there, that there's an idea of limits, that limits need to be placed in some way, shape, or form. How those limits manifest, whether it's limits to growth, dare I say growth, or other variables that might not necessarily be popular, but are necessary within the context of preventing all of these issues.
Thank you.
Oh, me up next. I think we're certainly all aware of climate change in the last 20 or 30 years. Sometimes you feel like there's not much we can do. We were just at that mountain planning symposium, and Mike Douglas stood up and did a great presentation of protect our winters. So there's certainly things that people are actively doing. But when we're talking about a mountain community, I think we just have to roll with it and not worry about it. A lot of mountain communities predate, say, the ski industry, so we were worried about climate change, we were worried about temperatures rising. If it's a tourist-based mountain community, pre-World War II, there was very little happening in the winter time, and so our current reality of what winter tourism looks like is pretty short, and we don't know what the future holds, but we have population centers, people live in cities, they want to get out, they want to enjoy the mountains. I think they're going to be doing that. People are going to be coming to mountain communities regardless of the weather. And so we want to plan for it, and we want to have the infrastructure in place. But we're a weather-dependent tourism economy, so I think we just have to work with the weather we have.
Yeah, I could add something really quickly. It's kind of along the lines of what Eric was just saying. There's a risk of sounding tone deaf, and minimizing what this is. Of course, it's an alarming situation. There's no doubt about that, and the impacts are all kind of known. I would also say that we're very fortunate to be in the mountains, and the climate is everywhere, and the climate change is definitely impacting everywhere. But the economy and the resiliency in the community will not fully hinge on climate change, meaning this will always be a relevant place. And if you look around the world, I mean, I think about Europe right now. Talk about erratic winters, right? It's like something magnitudes far past what we're used to here. And you see the ways in which those economies and those towns are adapting. Doesn't mean they're not struggling with it. There aren't challenges, but I do think that as things play out, we are well positioned to kind of adapt to kind of this ever-changing climate.
Might I add a little thing? I think one of the key things, again, dominantly in line, is I think cities and mountain towns have to anticipate this and not necessarily react to it. I think there is quite a bit of knowledge out there. There's a lot of patterns that we're seeing, especially now, and that there's no need necessarily to kind of sit back necessarily and kind of anticipate that these are the things that might happen and potentially kind of plan for them. The same goes for, it's a big issue in cities around population growth and infrastructure, which I'm sure we're going to be talking about at some point in time. But the idea that one can anticipate and not necessarily react to it before it's too late, because by that time things are already kind of rolling. So a little kind of addition to that.
Thank you. So continuing a bit with climate change, but also looking at other external forces that mountain towns have to navigate. So political instability, constrained air travel, pandemics. Could you share some success stories on how mountain towns have adapted to be resilient against these things? Preferably something from outside of North America that Whistler could learn from.
That was mine? Oh, gosh. We're all trying to point that one first. I think it's the hardest one, so we're pointing at someone else. Gosh, I think I'm going to answer a related question because it feels relevant to kind of my experience. I mean, there's just no question that these recent years have been defining, and the instability, a pandemic that none of us could have, I think, imagined. And I kind of go back to my first answer. It's really like, how do we respond in a time of duress, in a time of challenge? How do we come together? What is the spirit in which we, and how do we operate? What is the spirit in which we kind of share as it relates to the people that we're with? It could be our community, it could be our company, it could be our family. And so these pressures that you essentially couldn't have even made up the things that we've been navigating together over the last few years, those define us. Those define kind of how we operate. So I guess my response to the question really is about kind of going back to your values, going back to communication, going back to kind of acknowledging the challenge, but also coming together and being like our best selves. Like that's what's really mattered. And I've seen others outside of the world that I live in just that have responded in that way, have really shined and are thriving coming out of what has been a very difficult time. And I hope we're coming out of it because who knows what's next. But that certainly has been like the bedrock that has, I think, enabled people to thrive through very difficult moments.
Yeah, I think that there's, globally speaking, as mentioned earlier, I study cities, so from, thousands of years old. Climate change is no stranger to any culture, and it's happened. I think that there is something, and I mentioned it earlier, about bottom-up sensibilities, which I think that's generally what Bryce is talking about, like this idea of coming together, community values, and how do you foster that sense of community. I think it's important to recognize a few things, and I've said this many times, both to students and to others, is that the settlements of today, cities, towns, et cetera, are unique. They've never happened before. Like, a city of 1 million people never existed before the last, really, for the most part, couple of centuries, and now we see 1 million as a drop in the bucket. So the pressures that they're putting on other things and how they're affecting the surroundings, like places like Whistler and surrounding towns, et cetera, is unprecedented. And I think that this is kind of the highest order of complexity alongside with, urbanization. I'd put 3, urbanization, population, and economies. No one can guess what's going to happen across those things. So really it's about kind of how do you wind up really being adaptable, resilient, et cetera, against a lot of these forces that are ultimately unpredictable. And again, I think, I'm going to sound like a broken record here, but the idea of creating a shared community identity, et cetera, is actually a big part of that. And again, that's mixed into a whole bunch of different things related to tourism versus not, and economies, et cetera. But I think foundationally, that is really the kind of the key.
Eric, do you want to weigh in?
Yeah, what they said. From an infrastructure, you have to be adaptable. We've got tourist infrastructure, and that's the mountains themselves and the gondolas, and if we're talking about climate change, it's what we've seen in our backyard. The peak-to-peak gondola really helped drive summer business. The Blackcomb gondola installation was really there to complete this circle for non-skiing activities, and so that gives the Whistler resilience. The Fitzsimmons chairlift went in was really being planned around the mountain bike park needs for summer work. So locally, we've seen in Whistler, physical infrastructure that's being planned that is really not, ski infrastructure that we used to see. We are seeing that infrastructure that's being constructed that is available year-round and for more user groups. And that gives you the flexibility when the people change, if the borders close or if there's a pandemic. And I think realistically, Whistler did very well. It got quieter here when we had the social distancing, but in general, there was still a lot to do, and we just started welcoming different people. So tourism infrastructure is one side of it, but then for more resilience and community, there's the other infrastructure. There's the arts infrastructure, and we've got the SLCC, we've got the Ordain Art Museum, and so we're not just a one-trick pony town, and I think that gives you adaptability and resilience.
So Erick Villagomez, you touched on shared community identity and talking about balancing, or I think you're meaning balancing tourism and local? Or could you elaborate on that a bit?
Yeah, I think so. Okay, if this was my class, they would know that this version of Erick is his brain thinking right now and going too fast. So I think there are a whole bunch of different things that are related to that, and I think the tourism piece is an important part because it's related to economies. So this conversation can easily lead into, you know, what is the value of a growing economy and critique that, which I think is well warranted, and it's happening a lot in schools in terms of. I know there have been movements that have been called like degrowth, et cetera. But ultimately, those conversations are about kind of thinking and rethinking what growth means economically relative to what the local community is about. And it's very difficult to separate the two, right? Because again, a lot of the tourism industry fuels an economy here that a lot of locals benefit from. But locals as well, and the residents here, the real question is, to what degree is that social fabric? To what degree is that shared identity being created? And a lot of times that manifests in the shape and the form of cities and towns. So you have, you know, in different parts of the world, you have town squares, et cetera, where community members come, not necessarily just tourists. And again, later on, I think we're going to discuss a few of the Andean towns that are really interesting. But I think it's that balance between, you know, let's just call it economic growth for now, and fostering the community, the identity, the shared identity that will get through those resilient pieces. Because again, history is littered, literally littered, with towns, mountain and otherwise, that have based themselves on economies that have gone up, and they, you know, crescendo in a golden age, and then they go down, and they're now forgotten places. And you know, they were great during those times, and now no longer exist, and most people won't know them now. So that again is a potential history of Whistler, as it is of any place. So again, the foundations of those are typically within the community themselves, and the ability for the community and the shape and the form of these towns to foster the sense that when something difficult happens, that they band together in some way and that they can overcome it.
So building on that, let's talk about communities in the Andes and the Alps that predate playing in the mountains and destination tourism. These were historically agriculturally based communities, and how have these places adapted to this shift, and what lessons can North America take from them?
So that's great, and that was unexpected, back to back here. I actually wound up creating a little matrix for everybody. I love matrices. I'm a geeky guy. And I put Whistler in there, as well as Aspen and Revelstoke, and there are 5 Andean towns. And the reason why, a lot of people don't talk about South America, at least within the context of urbanization and sounds and towns and cities. But I did what I think is a pretty decent comparison that winds up going and that links into those bold over there, kind of the lessons for Whistler. And I'm hoping that we can share it in some way, shape, or form.
I'm going to share it after this event with the follow-up email. So you guys will have this, and I imagine you can't read this. Dan?
That's right. So I'm gonna go through let's just you know, round of applause, of course, for Mandy, because she's actually using my computer. So she's trying to learn all my functions. But I won't go through all of them, but I'll point to a handful, and I've even linked it up to Google Earth if you wanted to. But here, let's not do that yet, just yet. It's really interesting. So again, some of these, the lessons aren't bold. I'll hit on, let's just say, 3. So Juarez, Peru, which again, it's about 3,000 meters up. Really, it's one of the few places that is a mountain town that actually has sprawl. It's really interesting. It has a kind of gridded footprint, colonial footprint. And what it winds up doing, look at that, everyone. Whoa, that's, and if you could do this, can you tilt it? Let's see if you can do this. Let's see if you can, let's go.
Boy.
Let's go. Mandy is on the hook right here. I am putting her on the spot. Oh, there it is. You figured out how to do it. Beautiful. Well done. Well done. There it is. Star of the show, another star of the show. There. So this is really interesting. If you kind of see it, you could see kind of the gridded core over there. And that's kind of the colonial, and the rest is kind of sprawled out. Now, what's really interesting about that is that a lot of the sprawl is in a floodplain. So this is what happens when things go unchecked, that it kind of just grows out, despite the fact that it's in actually very dangerous territories. So one of the lessons that, again, just a quick snappy lesson on this one, is that kind of the risks should really shape the form. And it's really important kind of to understand, because especially with the idea of kind of, and I mentioned before, kind of growth economies, it's easy to just want to build everywhere, right? Get more things, get investment, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But sometimes certain places should not be built on, just foundationally. So this is that, I would say, that lesson. What its future is going to be, no one knows. But again, arguably, those who are in that floodplain are in grave danger when the river there floods. Let's go to Otavalo there. We'll pass El Alto for no particular reason, just because this is my home country of Ecuador. And this is Otavalo. This has a really interesting lesson on economies. It is one that fostered its own economy. This is what kind of happens a lot in, and this was ever present throughout Europe until relatively recently, where these little towns become special places. This place is known for its textiles. There's another little town that's known for its leather, for example. And most of us probably have never heard of this place, but you have heard, literally, Otavalo, because they have kind of gone, and one of the things they're really well known for is music. They play these pan flutes, and these pan flutes are everywhere. I heard it in front of Broadway Station. I've gone to Europe, and if you go up and talk to them, they're from Otavalo, and they wind up kind of, their economy has grown globally by sending people to different places of the world, and then they take the money and they bring it back and invest in the town. Mind-blowing. But it's a really, really interesting place, and the idea that it has these seasonal flows. So not unlike the economy here that has grown, where you have like Crankworks, you have all the ski seasons, and it's done a great job of bringing that a kind of seasonal approach to this. They have it, and again, it's fostered a particular economy that feeds itself and that improves the lives of the community itself. So it's embedded in helping them, the people of the community, go and improve their lives. So you go in there, Market Square, Saturday is huge, and it's known throughout Ecuador, and people travel around there. But again, all of that, and let's just call it investment, all that economy goes back directly into the community, and it's not necessarily just for people coming and visiting. So it's a really interesting place. Again, if you've never heard of it, you have heard of it. I was playing on words on that one, everyone. That it's a really interesting spot. Last one I'll go, let's go to Pisac, Peru. This is part of the Sacred Valley in Peru. So most people know Machu Picchu, for those who have traveled around there. And you could see along the edges, and if you could tilt a little bit, you could see the terracing. They have integrated agriculture quite well into there. So again, this idea of a self-sustaining community, which I believe, again, is one of the main things for resilient towns. It has to sustain itself. This is a great example, and the innovation. So all of those little white, like lighter patches up there, those are all terraces. If you could zoom in, I don't know whether you know how to zoom in here, but you could zoom in, but you could see some of those lines. Oh, we've just gone in the mountain, everyone. That's okay. It's okay. There we go. Oh, there we go. Perfect. So you could see them right there.
Okay, I know. Just
right there.
give it a second.
Yeah.
Okay.
There we go. So again, part of the idea of why it's been around for hundreds of years is because it's found an ability to kind of go and to do all of the basics that humans need. Feed each other, they got clean water, etc. And part of that is, of course, the manipulation of the terrain. And this is a wonderful example. And all the towns along the Sacred Valley have ruins. You'll see some ruins up there that are part of the Incan Empire. But this idea that you can create kind of something self-sustaining, and that in some way requires the manipulation of your environment that's not necessarily a bad thing. So a lot of times we're like, you know, you can't deforest, you can't do that. And of course that's important to understand, but when you have to deal with the basics first. You know, you have to be able to get food, you have to be able to get water, you need shelter. And there's a lot of amazing lessons, again, with a lot of these towns that are really, really interesting that I think can translate here. Not to say that you terrace all of Whistler, but just to kind of get into our minds here that in order for a town to be resilient, it needs to go and hit all the basics for the people that live there. And that, by extension, it includes things like schools, you know, a kind of a social infrastructure. So I'll leave it at that. I don't want to take up more airtime. But you will be, again, have access to that little matrix there that you can go and just read through. And I don't know whether you want to add to anything.
Yeah, I think that's a lot of Andy's experience. I think when you talk about adaptability, you know, you started the question, Andy, about the cities, the mountain resorts, you know, agriculture-based, how are they adaptable? I think one of the things that strikes me when you're in Western Europe is there's a lot of mountain communities. It's not like here where we get in the car and you drive to Whistler and it's hours to the next one. In some parts of Western Europe, there's mountain communities every 20 minutes, and it really feels like those communities didn't adapt to the ski industry, the winter ski industry. The winter ski industry is adapted to those communities. And so you've got history, a lot of those communities predate the automobile. So what have they done as part of their transportation infrastructure? There'll be tunnels or roundabouts that go under or around the village cores. And by and large, those communities have a strong sense of self, and they haven't changed very much. And so I think that's it's a cool thing to see. Some of those communities, it's very regional. If you're in Austria, the robust winter business, but then the summer business is huge, and a lot of transportation up the mountain, a lot of hiking and experiences for tourism. But you can be in Spain, in the Pyrenees, and those ski resorts or mountain communities, there's these big wooden shutters on all the walls, and in April they just lock them and put bolts, and everybody goes to the beach, and the restaurants are closed. And so, you know, it's really regional whether or not a mountain resort is a four-season resort, if it's a permanent community, or if it's something that's kind of a seasonal thing.
Yeah.
So but it's everywhere you go in the world is different.
Yeah, and I think, again, speaking to that, and I think it speaks to what all of us have been speaking to a certain degree, is just like you said, it kind of starts from the community out. So it kind of starts there, and then it becomes, for example, a resort town for skiing or whatever. It existed first, and it was self-sustaining first. Yeah. And then the rest kind of came in. And what we see now is kind of the opposite in many ways, which again is first time in history where some of those have been created for very specific reasons, and that without necessarily supporting the communities that are supposed to keep it alive. And I think that that's kind of the tension, right? That's the tension.
So Bryce, building on these, well, that was a bit punny, because I was going to say these two have talked about design and infrastructure. Could you elaborate on the livability of mountain towns, and what is it that makes them appealing to live or more livable?
Yeah, I mean, it's probably no surprise. The first thing that comes to mind is just housing. I know we've all gone round and round, and as we should, because of the crisis that we're really in more broadly, where people want to be. I've got to hand it to Whistler. I mean, don't get me wrong, there are opportunities. We all know that, but WHA was ahead of its time. I mean, I have friends that have lived and thrived for now their entire adult lives as a result of WHA. Do we need more? Absolutely. Has that been a massive win and something that can really, I think, inspire others? No question. So I think I could, as I think about a lot of the topics that relate to livability, thrive, when I think about people thriving, no matter kind of where they sit within the kind of economic order, it just like all comes back to housing. And I see it all over, and I see a lot of people that we employ really struggling. And that's just not, for me, it's just not okay. Like, you work really hard, you bring your best self to work, you deliver something amazing, you care, you work hard for many years, and you're just like, I don't think I can hang on in this way because it's housing is always the linchpin. So it could obviously, this could spider into a much bigger conversation around housing. I know that's not the entire topic, but for me, that's like central to everything and pretty much everywhere, at least that I am. And seeing, whether it be friends, folks that I work with and whatnot, like, you know, that being the common denominator time and again, I feel like, you know, there's an entire kind of dialogue around, okay, so we've done these things that we could hang our hat on and feel, you know, I think proud of, and what else we got to do, because we got to push it further. Like, generally speaking, we just have to push it further. So without trying to like share all the things that I think we should do, I'll just stop at that. But that's really what it comes down to for me.
So you touched on WHA being a great example. Do you see examples in other areas that EVO is operating that are
Well, it's really interesting. I can't speak to another. There are absolutely examples of places where there's some level of workforce housing and different kind of manifestations. What's really interesting right now is what's going on in Japan. I think a lot of people have heard of, you know, affordable houses and a declining population, and, you know, folks from different parts of the world going, wow, I can actually live here and buy a house. So that's all true, but now there's starting to become these pressures in mountain towns, which are no kind of, you know, would be no surprise to somebody who's been in Whistler, but are certainly kind of shaking things up in certain places that have been more or less, I would say, like, have been going backwards for a long time as a result of the kind of the multi-decade downturn or state of deflation that Japan's been in. So what we're seeing is that it's just like we're seeing it happen like right before us, and I think that if everyone in this room can probably imagine, like, over the decades, whether it be in Whistler proper, whether it be in Pemberton. My first wave of friends moved to Pemberton for affordability. They weren't going to Squamish yet. They went to Squamish. Of course, that had a whole ripple effect in those towns, but that happened a long time ago. And now in some of the mountain towns in Japan, we actually see an opportunity to as a business where it's viable for us to create housing. Where for here it's just the ship sailed. Like, it's just impossible. The economics don't work. If an entry-level single-family home costs you $2 million, you're not going to be able to house hundreds of people. Like, it's just not possible as a business. Maybe there are some solutions that aren't yet discovered, but anyways, I guess back to the point, it's really interesting to kind of have seen that in North America, and then to be in Japan at a time when it's moving quickly, yet there's still time to invest in ways that we can create housing for the long term for people that work for us. So we're all over it. We're trying as hard as we can. It's moving fast. It's like almost you blink, and there's actually some real deal, like hyperinflation happening in some of the economies. We're in Niseko, Furano, and Hakuba. But it's actually possible right now. So we're inspired by, like, getting to a place that we know we'll never get to in North America as it relates to providing housing for our team members.
And Japan is really interesting because, again, a lot of people are seeing that as it's the first wave of kind of the population cliff. That all, with the exception of sub-Saharan Africa, that seems going to happen across the board, which again I think will affect tourism and economies and all this different type of stuff, and the effects that it's happening with the population drop there. So it's actually really important, I think, to keep an eye on how that's evolving, and how it might inform what we're doing.
Erick Callender, when you're doing work around the world and there's conversations about master planning for resorts, are there conversations? Do people ask about housing? Does that come up?
Oh, certainly. And culturally, it's so different, and we're so far ahead here in that it's generally recognized that workers are part of the community and they're to be celebrated. And it's also recognized that if you in a resort town going to a bar or interacting, it's a more interesting space when the workers are here. And so we're certainly seeing in many developed countries the conversation is mandatory because there's requirements. So if you're building something in the United States, very clear formulas required for workforce housing. Whistler's well ahead of the curve there. The challenging thing is working in countries where the employees are not really supposed to be seen when they're not working. And so they're not welcome in the resort. And so we still see them being housed, but they're showing up in buses or they're down valley around the corner. And there's policies in place where they're really not encouraged to be at the resort if they're not in uniform or they're not working. So the world is such a big place, and there's such a difference in approach to workers. So I feel very fortunate to be here in Whistler.
So I did wonder if any three of you could talk about any governance models, policy, or social structures that are helping find that balance when it comes to that, what we've sort of referenced here, the knife edge between working class and the wealthy.
Well, certainly we see it in play here in Whistler with the WHA and the inclusion. You know, it's not to be understated, but our zoning and our limits on buildable size has been really key, in my opinion, of the success of Whistler. With probably we can count on one hand the number of 20,000 square foot homes there are in this community, whereas a lot of places feeling is that if you have the money to do it, then you should be allowed to do what you want to do, and you do land assemblies and you build your palaces for yourself. But it's a completely different feel when you're driving into a valley that has these monster homes, and there's that wealth divide where there's just such a different physical difference between who's here working and living and who's here playing. So locally, I really feel strongly that the planning that happened at Whistler before, you know, after the first cabins were built around Alta Lake, but from the beginning, it put a huge limit on that individual wealth, the expression of wealth.
Yeah, I had a quick comment or two. Yeah, I think again, there's something to be proud of, and I think we just got to kind of figure out how we can do more. Still, the pressures have not gone away; they exist. They're better than a lot of other places. It's night and day better, and at the same time, like, can we challenge ourselves to kind of look a little bit to the right or left and say, okay, what else is possible as we think about future-proofing this place for people that are going to work and live and be here for the long term, raise their families. So I love to see that continue to move in the right direction. The other thing I'll say is I just thought of a really kind of, this has always stood out to me as an amazing story. I moved here, you know, lived with a whole bunch of people in a house, you know, down on Easy Street and every other, well, all over the place, for that matter, couches and whatnot. And I had a roommate in like the, I think, late 90s that moved to Golden because he was over Whistler. You know, a lot of people go, I'm over Whistler, it's this, that, and the other, and you kind of get in that circle echo chamber and whatnot. And I never did that, but he did that. And I remember visiting him out there and kind of looking around and saying, you know, how are things? He loved it at the time. Well, he came back, and he lives in WHA housing. He's been here ever since. He's in the trade. He's in the trades. And we were on our mountain bikes together, and just talking about how things are. And he's like, you know what? He's like, where this is going is this edge between the very wealthy and those and others. And he's like, I love the fact that the wealth that does exist here is paying for all the infrastructure that I use with my family all year round. Like the property taxes that are deployed into the trails, the parks, the schools, the housing. He's like, and this is someone who was over Whistler, right? Because of how fancy it had gotten or whatever it was. And I just like love that moment, that recognition of seeing a 180 and really recognizing that like there is a balance here. Like these things they are symbiotic. Now there can be pressures and there can be divides for good reasons. And at the same time, if we kind of understand that connection and how harnessing it in the right way, in a balanced way, creates really good outcomes for people who live here, which he did, which I never would have imagined. Like that was an inspiration for me, and I've shared the story a lot of times, and just really appreciate the fact that it's easy targets to throw it at the house wherever it is that costs $10 or $20 million, and I understand that, and that recognition around how it can benefit all of us who are spending time here with our families, I think is really important.
Okay. I tried to not get them to just wax poetic about Whistler, but they've all slid there. So what can Whistler do better?
So I think, you know, I write a lot. For those of you, most of you probably don't know the stuff that I write here. Well, clearly because it couldn't get linked to the,
Yeah.
There it is. but I do write a lot about kind of the wealth and inequality, and that's a phenomenon that is really tied to the system that we have. There's plenty of research on it. Recently, even the Center for Policy Alternatives came out with a graph that there is a growing inequality that's happening across Canada, and it's been happening for decades. And there are a variety of reasons for that I won't kind of get into. And I think it is tied to just really the system that we have here, and of which Whistler is a big part. So in terms of kind of doing better, again, I would say foundationally there are a few things. One is going back to kind of the original stuff that I wound up saying, understanding limits, what those limits are, understanding that there's a kind of bottom-up intelligence from the people and that there has to be some sort of transparency so that the people that live here, all of their desires, their requirements, whether it's social infrastructure, hard infrastructure, can somehow be manifested in the physical environment in very, very tangible ways. And then I think that there's something about the idea of how that is fueled economically, and how one could potentially shift from one that is dominantly extractive to one that is really kind of homegrown. That, again, there's a certain self-sufficiency that's required. And again, that's the overarching lesson, I would say, from all of the towns and cities that have really stood the test of time. There was always that manifestation where the people themselves were represented, and they were the ones, of course. Cities are people. That's all. Like, they're physical places, of course, but really, what is a city or a town without people? It's nothing, and it evaporates. So understanding that is the foundation. It's all the permanent residents, the people here, the people making decisions about what's going to wind up happening and how are you going to change and adapt to a lot of these things that are inevitably going to come that we don't know, right? So that would be my 1 cent.
That's all encompassing. I guess I could come up with something that's this high level and philosophical, but I'll take a different tact. At Ecosign, we're often physical planners. What can we do better? Parking, knowing where to park. Most mountain resort communities, there's a reality here. There's a few exceptions in the world that use trains. Even Switzerland's got trains, and you can take a train to the ski area, but 70% of the Swiss drive cars to the ski area. Japan's an outlier in that they've got these high-speed train systems, and you've got a significant number of skiers who are arriving by train. I know everybody dreams of trains solving transportation woes, but the reality is trains don't go uphill very well, and mountain communities are usually really hilly, and just the costs of that infrastructure is really hard. So just accepting that there's a certain amount of vehicle traffic. Sure, we can do better with carpooling. We can do better with e-bikes, end-of-trip facilities, so that people can feel like they can take their bikes and change or get people off the road. I think all of that's fine, but most mountain communities, like Whistler, when you drive in, there's lit signs that tell you how many parking spots are available at the various, and it's very, very easy to follow. And as you come into town, you can say, oh, look, there's a green, and it says 48, 47, 46 stalls remaining, and you make decisions based on that. So I feel that Whistler, we've got one sign at the conference center, but I'd like to see them on the highway and, just manage the spaces that we have and direct people to it. I think that would help with congestion, and people aren't going in circles looking for parking spots. So that's a small solution, but it's direct and easy to implement.
Yeah, I'll keep it super short. And I'm sorry to beat the drum again. I think Whistler. I think this is absolutely a general statement. I could say more broadly, but how can we make it easier to bring supply to the market as it relates to housing that is for people that are going to be living here year round? Like, there are more levers to pull, and I think they need to be pulled, whether it be for today, of course, but also for the future, to continue kind of on the trajectory and to create a livable place for more. We just need to make it easier to bring that housing to the market, and we're going to have to make some trade-offs. Like, growth and change are difficult. We all know that. Generally speaking, like this place has been evolving in a way that is kind of extraordinary for obviously a long time. And can we get comfortable with some of those trade-offs and bring more housing meant for truly workforce, in the years to come?
I think I agree with what you're saying, Bryce. My concern, or what I've been wrestling with in my years in Whistler, and I'm very supportive of the WHA program. My concern is that it's based on a growth model, and all the discussions are about we need more housing, we need to build more housing, we need to build more housing for employees, and I don't see where we get off that growth model. And at the same time, I also see that it's a victim of its own success. We have a policy where people own units that aren't appreciating in value, so by design, you don't have an incentive to sell them because there's no profit model there. But what that means is people aren't selling them. And my suspicion is that on the other side of this, we have to find a way counterintuitively to incentivize people to sell their units when they're aging out of the workforce. And right now, I can think of locals who have left and they've gone to Powell River or Denman Island. They've gone out, but they tend to be No, they're the people that were in the open market, and they cashed out, and they used those savings to create new lives for them outside of the valley. Whereas in general, it feels like the people who are in WHA who are aging out, they don't have a nest egg, so they're not leaving. And that's wonderful from a sense of community, but the challenge now is that we keep on building more units for more people. So if there's a way that we can almost have an amnesty where people can, the other side of this is that there are people that have units in town that they paid $150 a square foot is what they can sell them for. Whereas what does it cost to build employee housing today? $800 a square foot?
Something like that. Probably.
So maybe the solution is you say, hey, look, and if you sell the next 3 years to a worker, you can get $400 a square foot for your place. But if you keep it and your kids inherit your place, you'll get the $150. So there's some way, and then if the people are trying to buy, if they have a choice between $400 a square foot or $800 a square foot, they're still going to be happy. So I don't know what the solution is, but in my feeling is we have to find a way to get better use out of the employee housing stock we already have.
So, Glenn?
Everyone's shaking their heads. We get the full.
Did we hit on something?
Erick Callender, is there any example of a resort town that's rejected the growth model?
Oh, sure. Banff. It's in the national park, and they've been fighting growth, aggressively, not bottom up, but top down from the federal government. But that's a local example. Certainly in France, Le Grave is famous for telling everybody to go away, and they don't sell. You have to kind of do a test and see how many generations you've been in France before the people will sell you an apartment. And they've got the same old pulse gondola that moves 400 people an hour, and they've really rejected replacing that. So I think that's a classic example of a community that has a very strong sense of self and has no interest in the benefits or the wealth that comes with more development. So, and those are two examples, but I think there's many out there where it's not based on a growth model.
Okay, great, thanks. I have one more question for Bryce before we move on to audience Q&A. Bryce, what opportunities do mountain towns have when it comes to their relationship with nearby urban centers?
Yeah, I think that for me, at a very personal level, I have a passion for introducing kids that wouldn't have the opportunity otherwise into these inspiring places that we know have changed our lives and would change their lives. It's multi-pronged. One, I feel like the right thing to do. Like this kind of is a reflection of a much longer story from my childhood, but I wouldn't have ever been able to even have participated if it weren't for somebody opening that door for me. And from that moment on, it's changed the entire trajectory of my life. I wouldn't be sitting here today if it weren't for that. And I've seen the power of it, and I think, and I don't know if anyone would argue with the fact that we now more than ever we have all kinds of just pressures on our lives. relating to technology and kind of what's happening kind of at the global level, politically, so on and so forth. So, human connection outside and the power of that is, I think, the antidote to some of those pressures, and specifically to open those doors when the doors otherwise may not be opened, is an opportunity and a connection point between mountains and of course, urban centers. Now, in addition to that, when we think about the kind of circularity, now by being introduced at a very young age, like I'm going round and round through that circle of, as a customer, with my family, the list goes on and on because I was exposed. So if we think about it, the hurdles, the economic hurdles that we all know exist to be able to even get into the outdoors, much less ski, snowboard, or mountain bike, when we can open those doors, set that track, the inspiration that comes from it, those are future customers as well. Those are people that really do drive these economies, their families, and themselves. And so, again, first and foremost, it comes from a place of inspiration. It's because of what I believe and what I care about. And at the same time, when we think about kind of the long term and creating customers for the future and the circularity, that's another reason to kind of open those doors.
Thank you. Did either of you want to add anything to that before we move to audience Q&A? No? Great. Okay. So if I could get Kathy and Sam, they are going to run microphones up either aisle. Does anybody have any questions for our panelists? Great. Sam, can you bring the microphone to Kathy Jewett in the center here? Yeah, if you can. No, yes. Like you'll go here.
All right. Thanks very much. Bryce, something you said really struck me. The other day we had a young man come. We had coffee with council. I'm one of the local councilors here. And he came in and he was so upset about the lack of connection that he felt that a lot of the local issues towards young people that are trying to make a go of it here. I can remember when we used to have to do company fit interviews. There were so many people that wanted to work here, and that's not the case anymore. We did a great job marketing to the world for tourism. What can we do to make this be a place where people want to come to because they're treated well, and so they treat the people that come here well? I think that that's something that we haven't done. We haven't supported that part of the population well enough to have that translate to great times for the people that come to visit here too.
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't think there's a silver bullet, but I do think that it starts with the question. It's like, it probably is surprising to a lot to think that that's the experience, because we fancy ourselves and we think of ourselves as people that are open arms and want to deliver a certain experience, yet at the same time, that's not the experience people are having. So I think, first and foremost, broadening the consciousness and letting people understand that this is actually what's going on. I hear it often where people say, like, I moved to this place and I just don't feel like there's this embrace or this sense of community. I'm thinking to myself, oh my goodness, that like runs completely counter to everything I believe in, that I think that we stand for, but then here they are amongst us not getting that feeling that we think we stand for. So again, first and foremost, even as you said it, I was like kind of taken aback, and I'm just thinking to myself, does everybody know that that's the issue? Are we socializing that? Because when there is that consciousness, those of us that are, whatever role we play in the community, we have the ability to kind of make a change and make it feel different for those people. I think there's like probably tactically a whole list of other things that as a community we could start thinking about, like how can we do the most good for the most people that may be in that seat. But I think it starts with the consciousness, and so I think the question, hopefully even by asking it in this audience, will spur kind of a level of consciousness around that being a challenge, and then inspire us to think about how can we kind of mitigate.
Thanks.
I was curious to know what your feelings are and how other mountain towns are dealing with the change in weather. A tourist comes here and spends an awful lot of money per day for a family of four or wherever else. And if it's raining hard, What are mountain towns doing to be offering a product which gives an alternative to getting wet out there? Water slides, movie theaters, second pool, that sort of thing.
And who's the question for? All three?
Yeah, I actually, a lot of the European ski resorts have less facilities. If they're the smaller kind of, people are kind of going to them to avoid the large built-up resorts. And so I think when the weather's poor, people are more, spending time with families in cabins and whatnot. An exception was Courchevel a few years ago built a huge aquatic center, the local government. So I think we do see that there's some resorts have large infrastructure projects which are say indoor facilities, sporting facilities that are in place. But a lot of other ones are you kind of in a mountain community and there isn't a lot of infrastructure.
There's something historically, again, a lot of the initial travel, I would say, if you go back again through history, was just to experience the culture of the people there. And I think, oh, sorry, thank you. Oh, it's nice and warm. It's nice and warm. I like this. It's nice and warm. So a lot of the historically, people traveled for experiences, whether it was landscapes, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, but also for the culture that was fostered. I think all of us, if not most of us, have been to a place where you just want to experience the people themselves and the rituals and the spaces that they inhabit. So to my experience, a lot of that is that is the main attraction. And there's skiing and there's all the other amazing things that can happen in some of these towns. But, in the absence of, with rain or whatever, usually, again, the attraction for the most resilient, I would say, are the people themselves, to kind of go in to see what they're doing, whether it's, Otavalo, going to the market and just seeing everyone and partaking in that cultural experience. So I think that that's also a little piece of the puzzle as well. There's the infrastructural piece, but again, it comes from everyday life, swimming pools, people doing their everyday lives in an amazing place is really a kind of antidote to that as well.
I think that the question ties to the question just prior. I think we have to create those places for people to interact. We do have a real loneliness epidemic. That's a very real thing, and often for many of us it's hidden in plain sight. So that's why it becomes a kind of a jarring surprise when you hear something like, really, is that what people are experiencing? How is that? And what we've looked to do, and we have a long ways to go, I'm not saying we're perfect in any way, but often it's creating the place and the opportunity to connect, and that's what's needed. People want to be there. So if you're stuck in your living room when it's raining for however many days a year in this part of the world, and don't have those public places that are actually affordable to engage others in, then it's a real hard thing to do. So I think that maybe the good news is by leaning into that and finding those opportunities, you're killing multiple birds with one stone. And I think that the two questions are interestingly kind of connected, especially when we take to heart the opportunities to kind of create those places where people can connect.
The warm mic here, nice and warm. Yeah, I want to kind of build on that. The idea, and I'm going to be, because I talked about bottom up, which isn't a pretty abstract thing. But the idea of creating spaces and creating and shaping an environment based on those interaction and those relationships, that's really what I've been trying to say, probably very inelegantly. But the idea that those relationships are important, I completely agree. And then it's okay, what can a town or a municipality do to foster something that is already there, right? And that's already happening. Where are places, I would assume, unfortunately I don't live here, but I would assume that there are places that people already go to that are kind of maybe an amorphous space. I'll give you an anecdotal example. Back in the day, and this might make people angry, of course, but when the Vancouver Canucks lost in the finals, everyone's like, oh, I hate that time. There was a really interesting place in Surrey. It was a nondescript corner at the intersection of two main streets. But the community would go, and while they were winning and they'd go in front of this little, I think it was like a lawyer's office in a little strip mall, and really gather and kind of just celebrate. And at that moment, I was like, why isn't that a square right now? Like, if that's naturally a gravitational point, why can't we formalize that in some way that shows those relationships? It's clearly happening already. That is kind of that step, right? And I think, again, I agree that there's a connection between those questions, right? So you can kind of go and you can shape an environment in order to foster those relationships, which I think is pretty key.
Hi, I'm Sue, and it's interesting what you just said just made me put up my hand because it's been one of the things that's been a little bit missing from this conversation, I think. I've lived here since 2013. I used to recreate here before that, and I have felt it's really hard to connect with the community here in Whistler, and I've gotten involved in volunteering, and I'm actually the chair of the board of the Whistler Film Festival, which is celebrating its 25th anniversary this year, so I hope you all come out. But it is one of the things that you're talking about is that sense of community and being able to have that. What I really heard in a lot of the solutions that you presented was that sense of empathy and how do we join together and solve problems together as a community. And I truly think arts and culture is how, I think the O'Dane's fantastic. I love the Squamish-Lillooet Cultural Center. We've got a lot of amazing resources here. Arts is struggling. And nobody really said it as one of their solutions. We have other festivals here like Crankworks, which I'm not sure if it's struggling as much as the Whistler Film Festival is, just in getting support and with rising costs. And so just, I guess, you mentioned in your just last comment is it's really important for the community to support that stuff. How do we encourage that? How do we, we try and do as much as we can, but any suggestions, what you've seen, success stories where arts is really in a sports town put at the center of, we've lost our theater here, and so now we're kind of limited in venues. There's so many challenges that we're facing. Any suggestions, we'd love them. Thanks.
Back to the worm. So, yes, anyone who knows me, and my wife's staring at me right now, so, is that and I've said it many times, I'm like, I think everything stems from the arts, in Erick's opinion. In terms of really the birth of culture is the arts in many ways. And usually all of the rituals and stuff that we do have some sort of artistic expression, whatever that is, right? So be they monuments or be they, pieces of architecture or whatever that is. To me, that's part of the arts as well. I think that the difficulty is tapping into what that is, right? A lot of times I find that people hold on to older arts, let's just call it older arts for lack of a better term, not worse, but are like, this is the way that the arts are, and not that they're not important, but don't recognize that there are new versions of that constantly happening. Culture is being created, arguably at a faster rate than any time in history, right? And trying to look and kind of capture that moment. So a lot of times, again, when you look at the birth of some of these, like I was talking about Otavalo and all these different places, there's an artistic expression first, and everything wraps around that. Now there's this very strange thing, theory, urban theory. It's called urban magnet theory. You will probably have never heard of it. And the idea behind it is that everything starts with an understanding of place. Built environment and urban design and policies follow suit. They're at the end. The first and the struggle, the most difficult thing, is to find that kernel or the series of kernels that you can build around. So the arts, I think, is a really interesting one. And I think the arts generally are struggling. I know in Vancouver, if you look at, theater, they're struggling. The art galleries are struggling. And I don't think it's because of lack of relevance. It's more of, actually, it has transformed in some way. And you have to recognize this transformation. Once it's recognized, you can really build a culture around that. And in will come new types of spaces, new types of rituals and things that happen, whether they're festivals, whether they're, there are all of these things that are wrapped in that. So again, another random story about Otavalo is that they have a winter solstice festival that's called Inti Raymi, that people go from all around and they bring it in, and it's around this cultural thing, and it's around kind of, and there are artistic expressions. There are artisans creating sculptures, etc. So I think it's that. I think you've hit the kind of the nail on the head, where it's how do you recognize it, and then how do you build around that?
I think to respond to the same question, but again, a less of a philosophical statement. In Whistler, it feels that there's an exception that we've got the library, which is a phenomenal public space where everyone is welcome to go to the library. You're indoors and you're in a space where you can. This facility we're here, it's a phenomenal facility, but the realities of how it's financed, they're obligated to charge for spaces. And I know when I go home, grew up outside of Port Alberni, you can kind of go to these halls and there's a bake sale or there's got a knitting class or something, and I think it costs them either nothing or $5 to rent that space. And a lot of communities have community spaces that are interior that there's really no financial set to congregate. And so what we hear, and Kathy knows this very well, is that Whistler's kind of, we've got these collections of community spaces, but we don't have the ability to access them for little to no cost. I've got a friend who's running dancing, and yet there's a profit model there. And if you're not putting $125 on the table to get a dance studio for an hour, you can't, you don't get in the door.
I'll trade you mics. Your seat's dead.
Nope. So it's, that's better. And this one's even warmer. Yeah. So, right now there's a talk about, multi-use facilities. There's some opportunities coming up with what we presume is going to be the changing. We've got a indoor tennis facility that is pretty long in the tooth, and is there an opportunity to create a place where it doesn't cost you $12.50 like it does at Meadow Park to go in and use those facilities? So I think our community, if we can find an interior space where we can find that balance, where it's open to the community for little to no cost, versus not putting out a business and competing against a business who's making their money by renting out spaces. So it's a hard balance to find, but I think that's kind of a pragmatic solution, is where can we have an indoor space where you just can go and, make paper airplanes or something. It doesn't cost you. You don't have to rent the space for $50 an hour or whatever the number is.
And I think close the house down. I think one thing I'm going to add that I think is an important caveat to that is that the interior version I think is important, but so is the exterior, like the public space. That is part of it.
I think we do that well.
Yeah.
If you're out at the Whistler Palette, the summer series, and they've got free concerts, it's full. So outdoor, we've got that covered, but it's pretty miserable outside right now. Anybody in here has to pay to get in here. Not $5. It was more.
I just had a quick comment, and this isn't meant to be a plug for Evo, but our response to that has been weaving it into what we do as a business. And so art and culture and community and events specifically have been central to the business. You saw a lot of it in the video. One of the challenges we had, and I know this is going to sound a little funny, but one of the challenges we had is when we bought the business from Dave, we loved the spaces, and there's a lot of them, as it turns out, but they weren't actually conducive for events. And then we just opened a space that's below Earl's, and we purpose-built it for events. And and people are touching on this, but oh my gosh, do people want to get together? We opened this summer, and immediately when through our first event, we had hundreds of people. In every event we've done, there's been hundreds of people, and people have been saying, like, this was needed, this was missing, we needed this. And so look out for events, but really it's all about art and culture. So, it could be a movie premiere, it could be a slideshow, it could be a talk, it could be, and they're not charged, it's just part of like kind of what we do and what we love, but also ultimately we trust that it helps support the business. But it was a matter of not having the physical space. The new one is laid out and is the scale where we can actually have a couple hundred people comfortably and do it. And it's just, I think, echoing what you're sharing as it relates to people definitely want to have a reason to come together. And when you have that space and there's like somewhat frictionless to get there, meaning maybe cost, people show up, and it's been really cool to see. So we feel like we're just getting started on that front. And having been here since 18, via the Village Sports kind of move, it's been like this thing where like, gosh, we can't fully express what we're about and what we love because we haven't quite had the physical space to actually pull people together. So we're really excited about that.
Kathy, we've got Claire behind you.
Hi, I'm Claire. I spent 10 years running the environmental charity in town. Just that'll caveat my question. We in Whistler, we are a really heavily nature-based destination. When Tourism Whistler does their surveys, nature is one of the top 3 reasons people visit here repeatedly. Over the course of a decade, we went from 1.2 to 3.7 million visitors, with the bulk of that growth in use being through the summer and the spring and the fall, which has a very different impact on the landscape. You talked a little bit earlier about climate change. There's loads of interlinkages with climate change, but one is biodiversity and protecting all of the other species that call this place home. And globally, in the last 50 years, we've lost 75% of wildlife populations. So it's been really interesting over that last 10 years in Whistler, having conversations around how do we, when we're looking at expanding trail networks and doing all of these things that are very important to us from a cultural, from a recreation, from an anthropocentric lens, how do we do that in a way that's in balance with and protects nature? So my question is, are there any examples that you've seen from other communities that you've looked at that have done a really kind of kick-ass job in terms of protecting biodiversity, habitat, and the other species that call these places home?
Well, besides Whistler, we certainly see in developed countries a tremendous amount of thought with biodiversity. I can think of Andermatt in Switzerland. You can't cut a tree down because there's been thousands of years where people were cutting down trees, and so there's just a few groves of trees left. And Lebanon, they've literally got a place called the Cedars. It's the only grove of cedars left in the country. So I think a lot of places that are working with tourism are finding that balance where the areas have levels of protection. I can't think of a thing where it's done voluntarily. It definitely seems to be a acknowledging at a governmental level, municipal or federal or countrywide. But there's certainly we found working around the world in mountain resorts is that it's almost impossible to find a mountain resort that isn't, part of a protected area, and that you're either working next to it or within it. And there's certainly a focus to minimize disruptions and to find that balance where you're not, paving paradise to put up a parking lot. Ecosign, founded in Whistler 50 years ago by Paul Matthews, it's a portmanteau of ecological design. And so our firm's genesis was to minimize construction in the mountain environments through thoughtful planning and focused development. So I think we continue to see that around the world.
There are actually very interesting things that have happened, I'd say, within the last 5 years. And I would say part of the most extreme stuff is happening in Colombia and places and Brazil because of the Amazon. And the Amazon, because of just its global impact, just climatically, but also the biodiversity, they have recently wound up going and legislating into law. I think it was, again, Colombia was the first to give it rights, to give nature and biodiversity specific legal rights like it would a human being. And that has changed everything, right? Those of you who don't know the Amazon, that's a forest. That's a forest. I recently had the opportunity to go there and take students there, and I've never experienced anything like it. So that, I think, is probably the extreme version of this. And my sense is that more and more places where biodiversity is really, really, really inherently important to the culture and value, and obviously we're looking at things globally as well as at the kind of the micro level, it's taking that, I think, big step for the full kind of protection and understanding of its important systemic qualities, right? It's a system. The ecology is a system that of which humans are a part. That is, to me, probably the most interesting stuff that's been happening. And again, it's been, right now, the epicenter is in and around the Amazon. And it's being pushed, again, by a lot of the towns and settlements and people that have kind of traditional knowledge. So it's the indigenous people that are kind of really pushing that, which I think is really, really interesting to keep an eye out for. I'm going to make it warm. I'm going to make it warm for the next few minutes.
So I will flag it is 7:31. So one more.
I think the gentleman there had
Okay.
a question there.
You're not, Kathy, do you mind?
So I've been here for nearly 40 years and have been a business owner for 30. And one of the things that I have seen that reflects, I think, the two things that we struggle with most, which is housing and transportation. When I started my business here, 100% of my staff lived in Whistler. And today, none of them live in Whistler. We actually have now opened a second office in Squamish, in part because all my senior staff live there. And when we, I think some great commentary around the WHA and the great things that it's done. But we are at a crossroads here, as you noted, nobody's moving out of it. And so how we can create, we're doing a good job of creating apartments. How do we create more family-oriented housing? We have lost a significant amount of staff who just couldn't see a lifestyle in Whistler. They didn't want to live in Pemberton. They didn't want to live in Squamish. They wanted to live in a mountain town. And I'm not asking a question specifically on that. The other the other frustration I see is the people who have moved, particularly to Squamish, who love to ski, are now stuck in traffic on the weekend. And so now I'm starting to get a sense that people may move away from Squamish because they want to go somewhere where they can experience the mountain culture without having to be in traffic. And that, Eric, the idea of showing people where they can park in the morning certainly is helpful. I suppose where I'm going with this is we need to keep evolving. We were very innovative with regards to how we designed our spaces, how we created housing for staff. And Whistler today is an incredibly vibrant place because we did that. But what are some of the out-of-the-box things that we should be thinking about in terms of transportation and housing? I suppose two things. Have you seen anything else in other communities that would be worth talking about here? And then the other thing is, I think we really get stuck in doing things the same way, and when it doesn't work, we get stymied. And so how do we bring more innovation to the community? How do we empower council and staff to do things in a different way that solve those two key issues? So interesting to hear out of the box, anything that you've seen, and how do we innovate in a more imaginative way?
What a big last question.
Yeah, I do. I can't think of a silver bullet, to be honest with you. The WHA, I think, does a great job, and you find that balance. The mountains started with the dormitory type living. My gut feeling is we could use a bit more dormitory style living. There's just so many dynamics. We had a lot more rental suites, and they haven't been lost to the Airbnbs. We have a very robust system to avoid nightly rentals in residential areas, but I don't think we really imagined that we'd be losing those rental suites to just media rooms or just larger areas. As the class of people who are owning homes are less likely to need to rent, and so they're less inclined to have rentals things. So we are, as a mountain resort community, I've been here for 30 years, and I've never felt like the people who are looking for accommodation have ever said, you know what, we're good. There was a time right after the Olympics left when there was actually a number of WHO units that were on the market that took months or years to sell. And that wasn't too long ago, 15 years ago. So I think we're on the right path. And I spoke earlier that I think we need to think out of the box and get better use out of the stock that we have when it comes to housing. And I think the rental models help. And you got to find that balance between providing homes for families where you have children, and you're part of a community for a lifetime, and balancing that with the needs of seasonal staff or people here on work visas for 2 years. So I think we're on the right path, and we just need to tweak it. But I haven't been anywhere. The only resorts in the world that house 100% of their staff are cruise ships. Everyone else is they're at 10% or 0% of staff. So we're sitting at 75% of our staff are housed. Our business at Ecosign, we're struggling with the same problems of just the entry points for staff to infill and stay vibrant. And I think we're coming up. We've got some staff commuting now from Squamish with no intention of living here. So we're in the same boat, but I don't have a silver bullet.
That's it. We're cutting you off. Thank you, three. And I'd like to welcome David Cronin to the stage to close out our session.
That's a hard job after that. That's a hard act to follow. Good evening, everyone. I am David Cronin. I have the honor of being on the board of directors of the Whistler Institute and representing that fine group today. Just a couple of closing remarks. Most importantly, start out with to thank Eric and Bryce for a terrific evening. Thank you guys so much. It was never our intent that we were going to solve this tonight, but I think this, to get the discussion going and to educate us about some of the things that are being done, to also shine a light on some of the things that we do very well, which I think is one of the things that Whistler doesn't do very well, is not transparent enough with the things that we do and how we do take from the money that comes in, and we give that to a lot of that comes back to the community, and I think there's ways to educate the community better. But for me, it was this link between activities, economies, and community that all three of our group talked about, and we talk a lot about activities and all the great things we do, whether it's recreation activities, ski and snowboard activities, whether it's arts activities, which as Sue mentioned, there's still work to be done there, whether it's food and wine. We do a good job of that, and we talk a lot about economies, but we don't tie it to community enough. And that is kind of what I wanted to just chat on for just a second, because that's what the Whistler Institute is trying to do. When we think about what makes Whistler special, we come back to recreation, we come back to arts, we come back to food and wine. Our job, our goal, our mission at the Institute is to add education and learning to that mix. How can we elevate education and learning to be part of the community that binds us, the things that bind this community together, as the panelists have talked about? And that's what we work on every day, and that's our goal, that's our hope, that we can play a part in that. But there's a catch, because there's always a catch to these things, and the catch is to do that, it takes commitment, it takes resources, and it takes investment to do that. And like we've heard about in the arts, and we've heard about in some of the other areas, people are struggling, and it's hard, to generate the funds and generate the resources to drive these significant components. So I'm here tonight to ask that as you think about your plans for the rest of the year and into next year for where you're going to support activities, particularly not-for-profit activities like ours, that you consider the Whistler Institute as a place to, to put your thoughts, your ideas, your participation, as you've done tonight, but also resources and, frankly, money, which that's how these that's how these events happen. And we appreciate everyone coming out tonight, probably the crappy weather. So again, thank you so much to our panelists. I also want to give a quick shout out to our sponsors and our supporting partners. We have BD Living, we have the McLean Family Foundation, the Fairmont Hotel, the Whistler Blackcomb Epic Promise Fund. They all help us and support these activities. Without their tremendous support, we would not be able to continue, and without your help and your support as well. Lastly, a shout out to Mandy, who I did think a great job of kind of herding us tonight. So Mandy, thank you so much. And so Mandy is our outgoing executive director, and so she is passing the torch on to, in this case, Sam White, who's in the middle here, who's going to be our new coordinator. And you'll be hearing and seeing more of Sam in the events upcoming. And to that point, I will talk briefly about the next event. Do I have to do something? Yep. I did it. Our next event is next month. I think it's 4 weeks from tonight, November 20th. We will be unpacking the mystery of cryptocurrency. Now, you'll see this when we do a post-email follow-up, we ask people for what other topics would you like to talk about? And the one we're talking about tonight came from that survey. And we'll do that again post this session. One of the things that came up a lot is, what is crypto? What does it mean to me? And do I need to know about it? So come in 4 weeks, and we'll try and answer those questions. We have a real expert with Dr. Victoria Lemieux. She's a professor at UBC. She's a global leader in this field, and she's going to help us understand what crypto is all about and explore what is one of the most transformative technologies of our time, what's the societal impact, and the intersection, and this scares me more than anything, crypto with artificial intelligence. So, you talk those two things and you bring them together, and that's going to be what we're all going to have to learn and understand, or if not us, certainly our children. So I will leave it at that. Once again, thanking the panel, Eric and Bryce, thank you guys so much. A terrific evening, and to thank all of you who've come out tonight. We hope to see you in 4 weeks. Have a wonderful evening, get home safe, and thanks again. We'll see you soon. Good night.